You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Coaching Inn. I'm your host, Claire Pedrick, and I absolutely love getting emails from people going, we should do a podcast on this. So this week is an open table with Sarah Terry and Kate Harrison, responding to an email from Sarah that said we should do this. Just before we introduce the topic and meet Kate and Sarah, if you would like to subscribe or follow, you'll get every podcast as it drops. And if you'd like to share it, we would really appreciate that. And I think you're going to have so much good stuff in this that you're going to want to share it. So, Sarah Terry, welcome to the Coaching Inn.
Having me.
So why don't you start by telling us your coaching journey?
Okay, so my background's in technology and leadership. So I started coaching to develop myself as a leader. And I signed up to a course at Henley Business School in about 2018 and just absolutely fell in love with coaching and the power of coaching. So the following year, I left my job to set up my own coaching business.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And then hit January 2020 and I sat at home twiddling my thumbs through COVID.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. Which was yesterday and 1,000 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Kate Harrison, welcome to the Coaching Inn.
Thanks so much, Claire. It's really exciting to be here. So I trained in 2021. So I did all my coach training online, which was amazing and actually surprisingly powerful. My background is in working for non-profits or charities. So I've worked as a grant maker, a funder for about 10 years, and before that charities. So most of my coaching is actually in the non-profit sector, mainly with funders.
Nice, which is my heart, because that's where I started too, the not-for-profit. So, Sarah, you sent me an email.
I did. I sent you an email off the back of a really rich supervision session, which Kate is part of, where we were discussing the difficulty that we as coaches were having in terms of growing our business and connecting into corporations. So Kate and I have been running a program in the background to take to scale up companies and larger corporates. And it sort of triggered this conversation around how do we measure and articulate the value of coaching when it's quite a deep and sort of non-transactional process often that we undertake with our coachees. And the incongruence really of articulating that almost intangible, magical aha moment versus these solid required KPIs from a corporate sector. And yeah, we had a really rich discussion and hopefully we can share more as this progresses.
Because it's not 1 + 1 = 2, is it?
No, 1 + 1 = we don't have an answer often.
Yeah. So, Kate, what are some of the things you were thinking about, talking about, exploring?
Well, I'd also add that the challenge isn't actually only for selling coaching to corporates. Non-profits increasingly have their eye on the return on investment as well, and also often have tighter budgets to be able to justify spending on a resource like coaching. One of the things I did was to think to myself, well, I need a nice comfy bed of evidence to rest myself on. So where is that evidence? And I did find it. The ICF, I think it's an ongoing study, but the ICF has done a study which shows return on investment of 7 times the value of investment in coaching, which is great. It doesn't marry up with the magical aha. I mean, it's difficult to unpack where that 7 times ROI comes from. It comes from a lot of places. But it was something that Sarah and I continued talking about, because it was like, well, that's sounds good on paper, but is that really going to convince an HR department to invest in coaching?
And interestingly, on that statistic as well, it was something like 17 to 19% of that data just was hard data. The rest of it was, more qualitative feeling as opposed to tied to anything tangible.
And when you break down where that ROI might be coming from, I have a feeling that it may come from very mixed roots, but some of it is retention, because it costs so much to recruit people. So it's both recruiting the right people, and coaching can help with that, but also retaining the right people, or not retaining the wrong people, or enabling the right people to go for the right jobs. So there's a lot there that you can unpack in retention. And then there's this kind of slightly more woolly side of good decisions, good strategy, good avoiding mistakes. And I think some of those things can contribute, but how you can really, I think what it is it's a million stars in the sky. I think that the ICF has a great range of sources and huge data bodies to draw from. And I would also say that there's been a meta-analysis as well, which is a kind of study of studies. So this is bundling together large amounts of data. I think when you break it down to an individual, I don't know that you could promise anybody that you're going to get 7 times the ROI on an individual person.
And a lot of what you talked about there was about not money that you don't spend, rather than increased money, because you're not spending it on a new recruitment, you're not spending it on mitigating, dealing with mistakes, you're not spending it on whatever. Interesting.
Yeah.
But then there's another side to Sarah's question that we also explored in supervision with Julia Carden, which we really enjoy. And that's how do I deal with the discomfort I feel? So that side of me as a coach feeling discomfort. And that's a really interesting thing to think about. And Sarah and I talked about this a bit more as well, about what is it in the coach that might be feeling the discomfort? What in the coach might they need to kind of get over to feel comfortable with that, articulating the value? It's that, and also, by the way, and I was looking recently at the ethics, ICF's ethics, and one of the ICF ethics is to be truthful about what I offer and the potential value of coaching. And I realize that we're in a world in coaching where quite a lot of people, dare I say, may be skirting the edge of that ethical place. Yeah. And when Sarah and I are both quite committed to ethical kind of working, it's one of our values, then we're in an uncomfortable place when we're trying to truthfully articulate the value.
Yeah, because the value doesn't come from me or you, Kate, or you, Sarah, or you, lovely listening coach. It comes from us.
Yeah.
Us, me, and the other person, where we have a lot less control.
Yeah. Yeah.
So true. So true. I mean, I do reciprocal coaching, so I still receive coaching. And I had a moment when I was in a crisis with some of the voluntary work I do. And I turned up to my reciprocal coach. I was on my second meeting, didn't have a lot of faith in her at that moment, I will admit. And it was magic. It was just the process of her holding the space enabled me to see clearly what I needed to do.
Because you were willing to step in. Because if you hadn't been willing to step in, the magic wouldn't have happened.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's that
Sarah.
mix of, sort of the ambiguity and the uncertainty, and trying to articulate that I often struggle with. There's that, and there's also this, what even is a coach, to some companies. So, I mean, when you think of coaching on the spectrum of coaching, my starting point is often, do you know what coaching is? And, how does it differ from, mentoring or therapy, or because you're asking people to step in, aren't you, and bring their whole selves and bring their families and their colleagues. I mean, we can't, we create that safe space, and, in order for people to be courageous and really step into that, because that really takes something. So, yeah, even defining that sometimes is quite difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're talking, I'm reminded of the podcast that we did with Oscar Trimboli, where he said there's 3 elements in the conversation: the speaker, the hearer, and the dialogue. And so now we've got 3 things that need to come together in harmony. And of course, sometimes, so I think about the dialogue as that middle kind of arena, the circle that we step into.
Yeah.
But they don't sometimes. So if somebody's paying for coaching for themselves, they've had it before, they're coming because they're willing to step in. They know how to step in and they're ready to step in. But when you're talking about ROI in a organization, whatever kind of organization it is, the people who are coming to the arena aren't yet known.
Yeah.
And it's an organization stepping in, not just an individual as well.
Yeah. But just because the organisation steps in doesn't mean the individual will, does it? So the commissioner of the coaching can be really bought in and go, yeah, I completely get how this is going to transform this and this and this, and I'm totally on board. But each individual person in each conversation needs to step into that conversation, into the arena of the dialogue, I think, don't they?
It was interesting. It's such an interesting point. I was coaching a managing director recently of a big consultancy company, and I asked him for feedback, and he said, "Well, what do you want me to say?" And I said, "Well, I'd just like to understand, the difference between when we started, this process, this partnership, and what was different when we agreed that you got to where you wanted to be." And he said, he goes, "It was a real game changer for me." And I thought, well, that's great, but in what way? And then it became this really unnatural, uncomfortable conversation. And I thought, well, who am I to ask for feedback? He's telling me, it was a game changer for him. It's made such a difference to him, and he's going off back into his environment, with a different mindset, with more confidence, for example. But yeah, because Kate talked about that comfortable bed of evidence that's out there, but I'm not sure. I think coaches rely on that, and it left me with this feeling: how do I actually take that as an example and articulate the success of that? I mean, it felt brilliant. I felt great. He felt great. And yeah, so there's more questions than answers.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I was thinking about as well when I was discussing the question with Sarah was, do commissioners or even clients make their decisions based on a view of what the ROI is going to be? Or do they actually make their decisions based on other factors, such as colleagues having experienced coaching, maybe they've experienced coaching, maybe somebody says to them, have you thought of coaching? There's and then it comes from lived experience and peer experience, rather than them sitting down with a calculator and saying, I need to generate X ROI from every hour of the day that I spend.
Yeah.
And I think it is, even in corporates, which is like a very bottom line driven industry, I still think that many decisions are made which are not evidence based, and which are intuitive sometimes about what is needed.
And often the result is intuitive, isn't it? Your man, it's been a game changer. That sounds like a felt sense, which is probably going to change a lot of intangible things that is going to make a difference.
You know, so like when you look at someone and you think, well, there's something different about you. You've got something about you, you know, but it's really almost invisible to the human eye. It's that piece.
Yeah. I went to the osteopath this week because I've got something wrong with my foot, and he did all his measurements and he's looking and everything, and he goes, oh, this hip is 1 centimetre higher than the other hip. Then he does magical things, and then he goes, look, your legs are the same length. You're pulling a face, Kate. They're sort of, oh, and I think that's interesting because I when I encounter my osteopath, I don't expect a tangible, physical, visible. I expect to feel better. I expect to be able to move better, but I don't expect him to go, look, your legs are wonky. Now look, Claire, they're together. They're the same length. So actually in lots of things, we're not expecting tangible, measurable outcomes.
And you still go to the osteopath without the expectation that something as dramatic as the change in your leg length is going to happen. You still go.
You want to feel different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I work, but part of my work is strategy work with charities and funders. And one time I worked with a very small charity and suggested that I bundled in coaching for the CEO at the same time. So we did that as part of the work together. And he'd never had coaching before. And he experienced it as enormously calming, enabled him to be centered, enabled him to be strategic. And so much so that he's then would finish the strategy, but he's continuing to commission coaching from me and continues every time we meet to find it valuable in the situations that he's facing. Though, as you say, Sarah, if I was to really pin him down to precisely define that value, there would still be metaphors of, he would be using metaphorical language.
So I spoke to head of L&D a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking a bit about this. I was talking about the podcast, and he said, which I thought was really interesting, he said, I really believe in coaching, but he struggles to take that up to board level to get the approval. So it's almost like what we are struggling with. It was interesting that he used the word believe,
and that demonstrates that he believes in people.
Yeah.
There's an issue for me about how we get the data, because the relationship isn't about us. The relationship is about the relationship, and it's about them, and it's about the work, and it's about them. And it's really difficult, isn't it? At the end of the engagement, you don't want to give them the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
So if you go to a restaurant, they go, did you enjoy your meal? And you say, yeah, it was lovely, thanks. And then you go on to the rest of your evening or whatever, don't you? You don't go, yes, the mushrooms were particularly tasty for the following reason. And the cheese could have been slightly more salty. You just don't. You just go, yeah, that was a fabulous meal. But so when we get the data, if there's going to be any data, is an interesting question, because it's kind of outside the relationship. My first coach actually hires someone else to have conversations with the people she's coached. So so at the end of so if I'm coaching UK, I say to you at the end, we do a what are you taking away kind of ending, and what are we learning? But then I say to you, it'd be really helpful for me or for us as a business to get a bit more detail about what's been useful about the process. Would you be willing to have a conversation with my whoever?
That is such an interesting point, because one of the things we spoke about in supervision that I've been reflecting on a lot, and I know we've talked about, Kate, is this coach as a coach, because of that holding that space and that awareness and that exploration. But coach, then same coach as a seller, as a marketeer, and how incongruent they are and how uncomfortable that is.
I've just had a genius idea.
Go on.
Well, we're not all in the position of being able to pay somebody to do that, are we?
No.
However, Kate, if you did it for Sarah, and
just
Sarah, you did it for Kate, were you thinking that?
Boom!
Light bulb.
You got that ahead of me, but yeah, of course.
Yeah. I hadn't realised that before, but isn't that a little bit genius? Because you're going to get the data, but you're not going to have to invest any money in getting it. And also, because you two know each other, you know the kinds of questions to ask to get the information that you need.
Yeah.
You could also think through, I'm sure that your coach did this as well, think through some of the categories. I was thinking what you were saying about when you go to a restaurant, you don't get asked for detailed feedback. I have been to a new restaurant where they did ask for detailed feedback, but they had categories. How was the waiting staff? How was the ambience? How was the starter main? Blah, blah, blah. How was the music? How was the, everything? And you could have more than just, please articulate what you gained.
Yeah.
It could be like, how was the kind of onboarding, the contracting? How was the ending? How was the management of the meeting times? You could separate it out a little bit, as well as trying to dig into the sort of less tangible, more mystical side of what happens in the coaching relationship. Great.
I'll have to have you back in a year when you've done it, see how you get on.
You should try it, Sarah. That's a great.
We should definitely. That's that's one to think of. And I guess as well, there's this, we've talked a lot about the individual and the, that's sort of what I would define as deep coaching, because oftentimes we go very deep in order to move forward. But also at an organizational level, again, that rolls up to sort of a sort of subtleties in the cultural shift, doesn't it? I mean, I think that's, talked about ambiguity earlier, but I've seen the impact of coaching across organizations, but just not tied it to any significant metrics. You mentioned retention, Kate, and things like engagement. They're huge topics within organizations. But again, it's it's that cultural shift, and it's almost like the leaders need to be open to that, and the learning and development teams need to be open to that and trust in it.
Yeah, you're making me think of some team coaching I did with quite a largish funder a year or so ago, where they invested quite a lot of their personal development budget in a couple of days with me. And it's really interesting because all the staff, more or less to a person, were like, we're too busy for this. But by the end, they were saying, we really needed this. And I was doing follow-up with the person that commissioned me, and she was saying, yes, this has made a difference in the way they pick up the phone to each other, the way they relate to each other, the way conflicts are resolved, the way decisions are made, and stress levels are, I do think it needs topping up, but I think that there are certain quite easily described, if not financially tangible, easily described values for coaching as in a group setting as well, team setting.
And you touch there on some the potential for measurables like days off sick.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And engagement, staff engagement is something which is a measurable, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a good precursor, isn't it, oftentimes to what potentially could go wrong.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I think, my background in technology, a lot of American software companies, I'll try not to make any judgments, but difficult cultural environments, shall we say, often, male dominated, hierarchical, command and control kind of organizations. And I think because that's my experience, it's, that feels like my mission to go back in and change that. But oftentimes they're the exact type of organization that just won't have it or don't feel the need, which is really quite interesting. And, I've just gone back into the corporate environment a couple of months ago, where I'm working with this company 4 days a week. And I look at how much I've been coached over the last 5 years, and I am like a different person. It's unbelievable. And I've been really trying hard to reflect on what that is and why that is. But I will sit in a room with, CIO, CEO, CRO, I could go on. And I will sit there and I will think, I am, as important as you in terms of the value that I can bring to the table. And I value myself, and I see things differently. And that has come about, not from therapy, not from age. We've mentioned the menopause, but a lot of that has been from driving, real reflection and exploration through my coaching. It's like night and day. And I've been asking myself, why can't I just articulate what that is? And it comes back to this, this thing of, that I just feel differently, that I'm still the same person. No one would notice it if they looked at me, but it's deep. And it obviously connects very much into this deep transformation, this deep transformative process that we go through in our coaching, and the difficulty that we have in, I say difficulty we have in articulating up something corporate wants to hear. Do we even need to do that?
So you know what, I was thinking as you were saying that, and I was coming in my mind to the importance of working with coaches that are credentialed and that have regular supervision and all these kind of points about what you'd look for in a coach. And I would say that any corporate commissioner or non-profit commissioner of coaching should be very careful about recruiting a coach that promises things that seem impossible. That actually I would be, it's counterintuitive, but I'd be more willing to trust a coach that actually struggles to articulate the value of it, rather than someone who says you will get, as a result of this, X, Y, Z things, because any coach that says that is not an ethical coach. Do
you know, I'm hiring somebody after this podcast. I'm going on a call where I'm going to hire someone to support us in a particular part of our business. And the final thing that made me commit was that they told me it didn't work for everyone.
Yeah,
I get that.
And they gave me an example of where it had gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And I thought, I like that because there's honesty there. Can I come back to what you said, Sarah? Because I think what's really interesting as you were describing, here I am 5 years on in the room. Because there's something about you having grown your capacity to think and feel and explore, which of course is a huge value to an organisation when somebody has got the capacity to think and feel and want to explore. But not everybody wants to do that or is able to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing in some organisational cultures, that's going to be more true than others. We work in the health service. And one of the things that I notice when we're training people to use a coaching style at work in the health service is that when you ask them to bring something to think about, they find that really difficult.
Yeah.
And that's not resistance. That's not, I'm not bringing something to think about. It's, well, what would I think about? So it's kind of stretchability. It's very interesting. So what an amazing subject to open up.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. And I think your point is coming back to that willingness to step in, and not just willingness to step in, but that ability to step in, which might be your NHS example where there's willingness, but actually they may be so overloaded by their situation that it's actually hard for them to take the view of what do I need to focus on, because there must be so many things for them.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what are we valuing that we can't even see?
It's a great question.
And I think, by the way, because we use the word corporate, and this question is about how to articulate the value to corporate, and I did point out it's going to be the same, but I think maybe it's important to relax a bit and remember that every organization is made up of human beings, and every human being needs the ability to think and feel and be willing to explore, as you put it, Claire.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming to the Coaching In, Kate Harrison and Sarah Terry. What an absolute delight. I'm expecting lots of messages in response to this episode. So email info@3dcoaching.com. I will put Kate and Sarah's LinkedIn contact details in the show notes if you want to carry on, pick up a conversation with them. So what do you want to say to finish, Kate?
Relax on that bed of fantastic information that supports coaching, and go with the mystery, and encourage others to step into that relationship and trust it will work.
Sarah?
I think for me that it's, coaching with individuals and companies is a partnership. It's like any relationship. There's no quick fix to difficulties to what you bring. It's the long game, and just step into that.
Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Sarah, for coming, and we'll be back next week with another episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Claire. Bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching In, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching In, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.